How are you? Well, let's get back to work after the disinfecting. We, as you know, every couple of hours spray the room to disinfect it. We're rigorously following our COVID protocol. We're almost reaching the end of the second day of Madrid platform, and I'm going to give way to the next round table, where we're going to be talking about trade and investment and how we can recover in the Euro area and in Latin America. And we're also talking about tools for international trade. The orange economy is also interesting. Digital transformation of SMEs in the Pacific Alliance. I'm very eager to hear about what the next panelists have to say, which is called the Pacific Alliance as a means of regional trade and commercial integration. So I would invite people to come up and take their seats clockwise. So first, Alberto Cerdán, Director General for Institutional Cooperation and Coordination from the ICEX in Spain. Thanks for being with us. We have Esteban Campero, who's in charge of small and medium-sized companies in CEGIB, and we're going to have José Antonio García Belaúnde, who is a representative in Europe from the CAF, Latin American Development Bank, and online we're going to have Francisco Cruzat, who is a community director from Startup Chile. Hopefully we'll get our connection soon, and in a few moments we will have Mr. Francisco Cervantes, who is the chair of the Confederation of Industrial Chambers of Commerce in Mexico. A round of applause for them. Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, or good evening, rather. I thank you very much for this invitation to Madrid platform, CEGIB. Also, this is a very topical initiative. I think that it's addressing one of the issues that is hardest for us in Latin America, and perhaps it's one of our biggest challenges, and that is economic integration. And we're raising this at a significant time in a period that doesn't really need to be described. We've already heard experiences from all the different countries, the different blocs, the different regions, when we talked about policies and productive and trade initiatives. We were just introduced, and we are now luxuriously being able to follow along with these panelists. Now, from the CEGIB on my side, what I'd like to tell you is that we're always thinking about the challenge of trying to enhance intra-regional trade, which is very low compared with Europe or with Asian countries. In Latin America, our percentage is only about 16% compared to 50 or 60% in other regions, which really poses a major challenge. And as I was saying, we are privileged to have leading panelists with us. We have, amongst other people, Mr. José Antonio García Belaúnde, who's representing CAF, the Latin American Development Bank here in Europe. The ambassador also has long-standing experience. He's been a fundamental player in building this Pacific Alliance. He worked as a minister in Peru. And just to start talking, asking questions. Well, this Pacific Alliance is still work in progress for us, but it was an intelligent move. The regulatory and trade issues that we needed to address were significant. In Latin America, we always become a bit excited about things, and we start thinking that, yes, we will be able to reach an understanding for interregional trade. So what can be done in terms of infrastructure and customs modernization so that this openness and trade integration can lead to tangible improvements in this context of COVID and pandemics and so forth? Well, thank you very much for this invitation. If you'll allow me to digress a bit, I think it is important to talk about the background, what's behind this Pacific Alliance. I'm going to make a long story short. Integration in Latin America has been a lot of lip service, not much real content so far. We do know that major projects became thwarted along the way. The Andean community had supranational infrastructure and arose to be a common market, and this happened 50 years ago in the 1970s, and we are now an area of free trade. Mercosur has its own problems. It's a free trade area that's a bit complicated a lot of times, and particularly a highly perforated customs union. I've always had the impression that there was a lot of political discussion because perhaps we aren't very realistic about what we can actually do. The Pacific Alliance responds to that. What was it that enabled us to have a political discourse? We have our founding fathers that envisaged this. And the idea was, well, we needed to first look at the problems we actually have in order to progress. And as lawyers put it, we need an animus societatis. The major crisis in the Andean community occurs when Colombia and Peru want to progress in their trade agreements with the United States and the EU. Ecuador and Bolivia then became an issue with Venezuela. So if we bear this in mind, you have to think, well, we don't need integration based on political discourse, but what's actually possible? And what can we actually do? Well, we need to work with true affinities. We need to look at our economies and our insertion in the international economy. And of the four Andean in the Pacific Alliance, all four have trade agreements with the US and the EU, and 3 out of 4 have these agreements with China. So the main partners in the region have these agreements. Now, there isn't a shared set of criteria, but there is among these countries. So there is a possibility to grow. And I want to get specific here. I don't think that integration can or should be major theoretical speculation. We need a sort of menu of possibilities. What can we do and with whom? So we have UNASUR. I think it became overly politicized, but it was very much of interest in terms of its development of infrastructure. It came about after a failed convergence initiative, but one of the key issues was the ILC. So,
dicen que el balón de Humboldt allá en 1760 cuando llegó a América del Sur dijo, y cuando Dios hizo América se olvidó del hombre.
In the 1700s, it was said that they reached America, but they forgot about mankind. So we have to be pragmatic. And we shouldn't have an outlook that just repeats what's done in Europe. So we have to work with whoever is able to. We have communications, energy, and there are several fields that we can work in. Now, what's good about the Pacific Alliance is that it was designed in a fairly flexible way so that we are able to take these approaches. But we do need to say in passing that there is not officiality. And Mercosur has some institutionality to it, which makes it very flexible, but at the same time highly dependent on what a certain country or several countries want. I'm just going to interrupt you a second. We won't have Francisco. We will have Jose Antonio Navalon, who is here from the United States of Mexico. He's ambassador in the United Emirates. Can you hear us? I believe your microphone is muted. Could you please? Yes? Yes, that's better. Everybody since the beginning of 2020 has had this problem. We don't need to deny it. Thank you very much. Sorry. Yes, delighted to be here with you. Delighted. Yes. Well, I think I've spoken quite about. Well, Ambassador, following along with your thoughts, and the idea that we need to be very concrete and pragmatic from the standpoint of infrastructure, as you said, what progress was achieved and what is pending in the Pacific Alliance? Well, I think that the Pacific Alliance has work pending in infrastructure, but in Latin America we do have the CAF, the Latin American Development Bank, and its priority is building infrastructure, but there is a tremendous gap there, and we need to make investments that we're unable to make now. We need 80 million billion in order to close that gap. And the Pacific Alliance is part of that region with this infrastructure gap. Very good. I'll leave the next question for the next turn. And now I would like to turn to Alberto Cerda and give him a perspective from here. Give us a perspective, rather, from here in Spain. When we talk about eliminating barriers for trade in this new paradigm that we're immersed in, perhaps we have something that COVID speeded up. It was digital transformation. We heard from a managing director of a major technology company here in Spain saying that in 6 months we achieved what would rather have happened in 4 years. So we can see that this happens with big gaps. And we had to develop the best possible strategies for e-commerce and work from home and all sorts of safety and security measures, productivity, and so forth. So in all of this context, How can we avail ourselves of digital platforms in order to enhance trade? What's your vision?
Thank you very much, and thank you to Madrid Platform for inviting ICEX. Good morning and good afternoon. I would like to refer to what the ambassador has been mentioning. I think there are some very good practices in the region, like the agreement DEPA between Chile, Singapore, and New Zealand. They focus on important topics for e-commerce. Many commercial agreements are already considering e-commerce, and in this case they deal with issues such as paperless trade, authentication, data flow, cybersecurity, which is fundamental for this trans-border electronic commerce. Like you were saying, the expansion of e-commerce during the pandemic was equivalent to the progress of 10 years in a few months. The increase in income in Peru is 900%. And in the countries where it has increased the least, it has nonetheless increased by 50%. So we will soon reach the figure that 50% of Internet users will be purchasing online. During the pandemic, we have also seen a certain fragility because e-commerce is sending parcels from one place to another, and for sometimes commerce between borders fell because it was not possible really to ship parcels from one place to another. We also saw that there is a 30% in the European Union, which is a single market. Only 30% only send, because there are still certain barriers like language barriers, stock management, tax management, etc. In some places, it is required to have a business, a company based in the place where you want to sell your products or to operate, even if it's e-commerce. So this dream of having your goods and services reach any part of the world is true, but with several buts. First of all, clients need to be able to find you. And platforms actually help businesses for that. The market is there, but there are different conditions. There are different platforms. It depends on the sector, on B2B and B2C. But they're very useful to prove products, to prove how they will work in a market. They reduce costs. It is true that you may not have all the information available that you would have in a physical store, but I think they facilitate the first step, and the experts that will follow. It really brings down certain barriers for many companies so that they can access international business. What do we have to do to not leave anyone behind? Because many times these tools show clearly the benefit for the more developed economies, but then it's not the same for those who don't have as much access to connectivity. So what are the efforts we have to do from an institutional point of view in order to achieve common norms? How can we test the new norms so that we can speed up a digital transformation? What are the institutional efforts, or what experience do you have between countries that you could share with us? I think the World Trade Organization has several initiatives, and they are really fixing this institutional or this international agreement for extensions, like data transmission. That's important. With COVID, the demand on this type of services has increased, and you said it very well. Not all companies have access to it or can access to it. Rural Spain, that has a very low density of population, have a difficulty to access these services. But I think governments can put a lot of knowledge in common. In our case, in the case of Spain, 20 years ago, we've been doing that. We launched the e-market services with European and some Latin American countries, and this was an e-commerce initiative, because a lot of the knowledge that has been gathered there is useful for all of us. With the exponential growth and issues like cybersecurity, many of the solutions have to be online as well. That way we can create courses, self-diagnostic tools, tests, local tests, tutorials, or maybe tutors that can actually advise a large number of companies online. Or there are directories that help you choose the best marketplace. There are really many tools that we can pool and that are useful across borders. They are useful for most SMEs and for most companies wherever they are. I was remembering the enormous efforts being done by several multilateral organisms like CAF, IDB, the single spots for e-commerce. Those are a great advancement for Latin America. The one-stop shops for e-commerce. So like the ambassador was saying, it would be very interesting to see them. I wanted to welcome the representative of CONCAMIN. It's an honor to have you here, and we look forward to hearing you share with us how to transform the instruments that we already have into real opportunities for our companies and businesses. The ambassador was mentioning it before. We are living in an important economic time. The economic paradigm is shifting because business models and the life cycles are shorter every time, which pushes to innovate. We have to innovate to remain competitive. And then COVID happened. From an industrial point of view, we had an excellent panel this morning. We heard about certain fascinating initiatives in the Industry 4.0 and the possibilities that technology is giving us to interconnect machines with cyber-physical systems and people, enabling extraction, evaluation, and use of data by the company. I wanted to ask you, what could the Pacific Alliance do to strengthen and improve SMEs' productivity and competitivity?
Pues yo creo que es un elemento muy importante.
I have a good example to share with you, which was the signature of the Free Trade Agreement. One of its main objectives was to give SMEs the necessary tools so that the market in the United States, Canada, and Mexico to grow. But to grow, they need to be digitalized, they need to have technological and economic resources, but more than anything, they need to have a legal framework that allows e-commerce, that allows SMEs to use e-commerce, really. And this is important. Big companies have all the resources to be able to develop their own markets and to create their own alliances. However, it is SMEs who need more support within these agreements, these frameworks. In this sense, CONCAMIN represents more than 1 million businesses, and 80% are SMEs. This is why this is our main concern from when we wake up in the morning.
En este mundo, en esta globalización que también va evolucionando y que va conformándose de manera diferente.
This world is evolving and it's changing the way it's shaped for a few years now. We have seen that the pandemic has accelerated a trend that already existed. Since the tensions between China and the United States increased, we started seeing reshoring, which was the possibility of relocating a plant that was in a certain country where labor and commodities were accessible at a lower cost. But then these tensions, along with the technological advancement, allowed for the reshoring or the nearshoring phenomenon. So this allowed to identify other areas with greater potential to develop operations. What are you seeing from Mexico? Are there new opportunities arising based on these tensions? You have a very powerful economic partner, which is the United States. So what are the opportunities that you are seeing from the industrial policy now that the regional and global value chains are being reshaped? Well, there are several opportunities. I think the most evident one for Mexico is in the automotive sector, parts of cars. There we've seen a very clear example of reshoring of electronic components that go into cars, whether they are radios, components, loudspeakers, GPSs. They were mainly being produced in China, and now they are going to be manufactured in the west coast of the country. This is a good example of relocation. Another good example is electric cars. We are seeing some very interesting developments. For example, Mexico can produce lithium batteries because in the end, the car is going to be assembled in Mexico. I think there is a very interesting project in Spain of this type, in which the mines in different regions in Spain are being integrated with the battery and with the assembly of electric cars. But more than anything, the idea is that the product does not become more expensive for the end consumer. It's got to be the other way around: better quality and lower cost. And really relocalizing value chains so that they can be closer or located in a place where it makes more sense. Thank you. Ambassador, following this line of thought of reconfiguration of global supply chains and of tension between great powers, I think there is an additional discussion that can give as a result new technological standards. For example, the dispute for 5G. What is the cost for a region or for a space like the Pacific Alliance to have these tensions between China and the United States, or maybe the position that Europe might take? So, how should the Pacific Alliance react in this sense? That is not an easy question. Three out of the 4 members of the Pacific Alliance have China as a partner, either as a commercial partner or as an investment partner. And then the United States is either the main or the second most important partner. So the countries in the Pacific Alliance are going to have a hard time harmonizing all of this. I still don't think they've been confronted to situations in which they have to choose. And I hope they can keep developing the mechanisms to deal with the non-alignment of these two great powers of the 21st century, which are the same great powers of the 20th century. So we haven't seen it happen, and I don't know what difficulties would arise from it. I would like to come back to a subject. When we talk about digitalization and infrastructure, we're really talking about investing resources. And that has to be done through Development Bank, whether it's IDB or CAF. We, as CAF, as Latin American Development Bank, have provided funds to our countries to promote the continuity of economic process, and 1.6 billion are devoted to SMEs through banks. So I really don't expect the Pacific Alliance to be able to address that, but the issue of infrastructure development or digitalization, which is key nowadays, has to imply the necessary capitalization of development banks. This is very interesting. I think the agenda is clear and investment is key to be able to achieve both of them. Alberto, if we were to give some suggestions or recommendations for Latin American countries or for the Pacific Alliance to make the most out of digital platforms or to boost e-commerce, considering two main axes, which are training and simplification of use, what would be your recommendations? I would like to say first that there are already some great platforms in Latin America. This afternoon we had a seminar with Falabella Group to share the opportunities of exporters and micro-exporters in Spain. And the information can be done mostly online and is fundamental. Then there is mentoring, there is the one-stop shop, there is easing the paperwork to our SMEs, and that's very important work. Then whatever can be pulled together to bring together knowledge and best practices is also an added value for everyone. Then, being realistic, we know that e-commerce requires the complete digitalization of the company for stock management, for data management, for marketing. It might look simple, but for a company it is really a very complex process, right? Because there is logistics, infrastructure, and once again we have to highlight the importance that infrastructure has. Okay, thank you. I am sure that CONCAMIN uses the Pacific Alliance to build bridges and to have common initiatives with its counterparts from other employers' associations, along with the Federation of Young Spanish Entrepreneurs and the Council of Spanish Federations. We will have the MIPYME Forum, which will be held in Brasilia in a few months. And I want to highlight one characteristic. We work for 2 days. The first day we work in closed doors, and you have the representatives of the employers' associations and then the SME secretaries. And they sit together and they work on a common agenda, really talking about public and private partnerships to create a roadmap. And then on the second day, we work openly and talk about topics that improve competitivity and productivity, which this year will be, of course, marked by the pandemic. And in that work, it's very interesting to see how public-private partnerships are put forward as the way to invest or to develop, but also to think about how to design and implement public policies. I would like to take advantage of this to ask CONCAMIN, what are you doing with employers' associations with the rest of countries of the Pacific Alliance, and what is the practical utility that you see? We believe that the image has frozen. Shall we give it a few seconds? Ambassador, I don't know if you would like to make any final remarks before we close this panel. Well, yes, if I may, just to recover the first question you were posing to the ambassador about reshoring. I think it's important to recognize the positive value of economic integration processes for our countries and the impact they have had in terms of growth. It is good to keep moving forward. We need to keep negotiating agreements and ratifying them from a practical point of view, while recognizing the possible negative effects that they might have. But I think that as a general message and a lesson learned, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, it is good to not forget and not change this way forward that we've been having. I completely agree with what Alberto says. It's been very important for our countries. The results will be positive. Now we need to reflect on what is going to happen after the pandemic. I don't think anyone knows for sure. Some believe there can be a third wave of globalization. Some say that precisely the second wave arrived with the petroleum crisis. We thought it was the end of the world, and it wasn't. Now, I think we need to see what we have gained from this pandemic. What have we acquired, achieved through all these years? And then imagine what we can do in the future. I don't think anyone has a very clear idea, and I think it's our obligation to think about it. So we have a white page. There's always room for policy so that we can build and consolidate the best possible ways to boost economic integration. I appreciate both of you. Please, let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you very much, the participants of this panel, and thank you for adjusting the time. I very much appreciate it. I now invite you to leave the stage using the left staircase. We will now start our second and last panel of this afternoon session. We will keep talking about the relationship between Latin America and Spain and their businesses. We will talk about the free trade agreement, challenges and opportunities at this new global stage.
La innovación, qué importante como vector para una mayor colaboración transoceánica, también la conectividad como elemento clave, fundamental en el intercambio del comercio regional. Y lo vamos a hacer también, como no podía ser de otra manera, yo creo que a lo largo de esta jornada prácticamente todos han sido paneles mixtos. Este es el futuro real, inmediato de los eventos que estamos viviendo. Continuamos, como decía, con la mesa redonda Unión Europea, América Latina,
European
inversiones
Union,
para
Latin
el
America,
crecimiento, la
investment
inclusión
for
social
growth,
y el
social
desarrollo
inclusion,
sostenible.
and
Voy a invitar a
sustainable
subir al
development. I
escenario,
will
por
now
favor,
invite
a los
onto the
protagonistas.
stage
Tenemos, por ejemplo, a José
the
Ignacio
members of this panel. We
Salafranca,
have
consejero del
José
Comité
Ignacio
Económico y
Salafranca,
Social de la Unión
advisor
Europea,
of
asesor internacional de
the
presidencia de la
Social and
COE y
Economic Committee
vicepresidente
of
de
the
la
European
Fundación
Union,
Euroamericana. Cuando quiera,
International
por favor,
advisor of the
puede ir
presidency
subiendo
of
al
the
escenario.
COE and
Y
VP
si les
of
parece,
the
ocupamos también los
Euro-America
asientos en
Foundation.
el sentido de las agujas del reloj, es decir, el más próximo a mí para empezar. Tenemos también a Clara Arpa. Ella es CEO del Grupo ARPA y presidenta del Pacto Mundial en España. Clara, por favor, al escenario. Muchísimas gracias. También contamos con Jesús Martínez Castellanos, el CEO de MAFRE LATAM. Por favor, al escenario. Muchísimas gracias. Tenemos de forma online, a ver si están ya conectados. Lo confirmamos enseguida. Exacto, genial. A Marielana Méndez, secretaria general de ASIET, Telecomunicaciones de América Latina. ¿Cómo estás? Marielana, ¿nos escuchas?
Marilena, how are you doing? Can you
Sí,
hear us?
perfectamente.
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Muchísimas gracias. Es un placer contar contigo.
It is a
Asimismo,
pleasure to
con
have
Ingo
you.
Ploger,
We also
es
have
el
Mr. Ingo
presidente
Ploger,
de Desenvolvimiento Empresarial e Institucional de Brasil. ¿Cómo estás, Ingo?
Business Institutional Development
Muy bien.
of IP
Encantados
Brazil.
de,
How are you doing, Ingo? I'm
encantados
doing
de
great, thank
escucharle,
you. It
encantados
is a pleasure
de
to
veros,
have you. It is
la
a pleasure to
conexión.
see
Vamos a
you.
hablar de conectividad.
We're going to talk
Estupendo que la
about
conexión para
connectivity, so
cerrar el
it is
panel sea
great
perfecta.
that the
Y
connection
yo dejo al mando de esta
to
mesa
close this panel
a
is perfect.
Celina Pérez Casado, que es la secretaria
the
de organización
moderator
de
is
FEAGE, al escenario. Por
Madam
favor, pido
Celina
un
Pérez
fortísimo
Casado,
aplauso para ella.
Secretary of Organization of CEAJE, for whom I ask a round of applause.
Haré lo que está en mi mano. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Bien, pues muy buenas tardes. Muy
Good afternoon.
Buenas tardes a todos. Vamos a ver si podemos hacer ese reto de ajustarnos a ese
Let's
tiempo.
see
Muchísimas gracias en primer
if we
lugar
can live up to the challenge of sticking to the time. First of all, I would like to thank Madrid Platform to inviting me as a moderator of this roundtable, but more than moderating, I am very happy that I can listen to you as experts. I also want to thank the SEGIP and Pablo Adrián and our older brothers of FEIP. I want to thank Narciso Casado, the Permanent Secretary General, because you always think about young entrepreneurs of the Spanish Federation of Young Entrepreneurs, whom I represent. It is a great honor to moderate this table about investing for the future. And now that we have to face the economic recovery, the transformation has to be collaborative. We cannot work in isolation. We're going to work to talk about trade agreements. We're going to talk about economic recovery packages, about renewable energy, connectivity, innovation, and we are going to talk about having a long-term perspective of what we have to do at this time.
Con ciertas preguntas en las que vamos a tratar determinados temas para intentar extraer lo mejor de cada uno de
I would like to
los
start with a few questions so that we can hear the best ideas of the speakers we have today. First of all, I would like to address Mr. José Ignacio Salafranca. He's the advisor of the Social and Economic Committee of the European Union, member of the Economic Session. He's the VP of the Foundation Euroamérica and the CEOE, where he is an international advisor. Mr. José Ignacio, what do you think of the policy of agreements between the European Union and Latin America and the timelines of negotiations, given the current circumstances? Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I remember that when I was an MP of the European Parliament, I received an invitation by an old colleague. He was the president of the representative of Italy. He invited me to the celebration of the 40th anniversary of the Italo-American Institute. I remember that the main speaker, the keynote speaker, was Mr. Carlos Fuentes, the Mexican writer. He was giving a brilliant speech, and I was thinking about his book, La Silla del Águila, where he makes a brilliant description of the times in politics.
And as the relations between Latin America and the EU progress, we can see that its ministerial dialogue, for instance, in 1984 in San Jose in Costa Rica, that this happened. It's political reasons, and we institutionalized with the Rio Group in 1990, and it was for political reasons that we overcame this political and ministerial dialogue when we started having summits in 1999. But without the political will, this wouldn't have been enough. But circumstances also play a role. And we are very much constrained by these determining factors. We are experiencing a very particular circumstance. We have a social, economic, and health crisis, the most major crisis since the Second World War. And in the United States, the victims were greater than the First and Second World Wars and the Korean Wars together, all taken together. We are digesting Brexit in the EU right now. We are rebuilding. We're talking about the future of Europe in a conference that we have. And we've been looking at more than 800,000 dead. We have extreme poverty. And so the Latin American Summit has a lot of vectors that are very encouraging. In Latin America, we have young gray matter. Our average age here is 40, in China it's 33, and in Latin America it's 28. And if we talk about political will, that's all fine and good, but other people here at this round table with more authority than I can understand that we need to move from talk to action. We can't just remain in rhetoric. And doing so means that we need to put meat on the bones of the association agreements that the EU has. Now, I had the opportunity and the privilege of being present at all of the agreements signed with Chile, Mexico, Central America, and until 2019, I was representative of the EU from Mercosur and these agreements. And this is all a very significant run-up to the current times. Now, the time frame of the EU are impossible. In other words, it took 20 years to negotiate with Mercosur. They concluded 2 years ago in June 2019. The agreement still hasn't been signed, and we still haven't begun with ratification. This is strategic because in certain states we have protectionist movement, and we're setting our sights through this partnership on an ethical and environmental playing field. This is 7 times more important than the EU-Canada agreement, and it's far more significant than our agreement with Japan. And this agreement, in a certain way, will exonerate our companies from a lot of tariff and non-tariff barriers. For Latin American companies, this means that they cannot export their products in advantageous conditions to all countries in Latin America alike. So this is going to provide us with opportunities, job creation, prosperity, and well-being for our societies. And along these lines, I think that we need to give some hard thought to how to move more swiftly. The European Union can't be the latest arriver at all of this opportunity. We saw this with Mexico and Chile. We need to think things through very much in earnest. And looking towards the future of Europe, we need to look at opportunities, and these agreements, these partnership agreements, offer very important opportunities for us and our companies, and we need to be able to materialize them, to conclude and ratify in much more manageable time frames. Change, the pace of change is stepping up, and our friends that will take the floor now will clearly explain how important it is now to be swift, to be quick. And events are setting the pace for us. We are fighting against a ticking clock constantly in our society, and we cannot move at the pace of tortoise. Spain probably will be on the commission that will manage this conference on the future of Europe, and one of the places where we need to place the accent is on moving more quickly. We need Parliament to make proposals, and then there's a negotiating process. It took us 20 years with Mercosur, and then the texts need to be translated into all of the EU languages and then begin an uncertain ratification process. So this EU-Mercosur agreement is groundbreaking. It is going to change the relationship that the EU has, and we need to materialize the signing and ratification of this agreement as soon as possible. We weren't able to see the hope prosper with the German presidency. We're hopeful about the Portuguese presidency, and there are always determining factors. The autumn elections in Germany, presidential elections next year, and Felipe González very rightly said that we can't ideologize the processes in the EU, which is one of the most successful, if not the most successful convergence process. We need to overcome this. Well, impossible times. I made a note of this. That's very interesting. Thank you very much, José Ignacio. Mariliana, very good afternoon to you.
Muy buenas tardes, ¿cómo están?
Good afternoon, how are you? Mariliana Méndez, who's the General Secretary of ASIET, Telecommunications in Latin America. You have been working in a leading role in telecommunications. You're a systems engineer from the University of Costa Rica, and you're also a degree holder in information technology. In 2015, you joined ASIET, and you've been directing this organization since August 2019. In 2009, you took on the superintendency, the SUTEL, and you held that term for two consecutive terms. So how can we work to improve connectivity in Latin America through EU-LATAM cooperation? Well, first of all, thank you very much, and thanks to Madrid Platform and Narciso Casado and Pablo Adrián for having invited us to be here. Well, indeed, I think that we need to mention that connectivity means increasing productivity, means greater innovation for companies. That's what brings us here. And it's also important to signal that for governments, it enables them to considerably improve their governability. For final users, end users, considering this current situation, also access to public health, financial inclusion, and even access to proper food. So it's clear, absolutely clear, that there is a need to broaden out and enhance connectivity in Latin America. And it's important that investment made over all of these years have been significant during the pandemic. It's very unfortunate that we've had to live through this health situation. We've increased traffic up to 40% on telecommunications networks, but our infrastructure has been able to withstand this, and this investment, the Inter-American Development Bank has mentioned that it's market operators that have made 80% of this investment. Now, exchange of best practices is crucial between the two regions. We have association agreements with the partnership agreements with the EU, and there is a section on telecommunications. And it's also important to indicate that technological development has made it necessary to broaden the spectrum of these considerations, and it's made international cooperation necessary. These elements have enabled us to enhance connectivities and thereby enhance benefits to our population. Well, we have to talk about the radioelectric spectrum. In Latin America, first of all, access is very expensive. Licenses are relatively short. There are countries that have up to 5 years for spectrum access investment. And there's also another issue, and that is spectrum renewal and issues of competitive bids are really aimed to raise revenue more than anything else. Europe has taken a turn in this sense, and it's important to exchange best practice. And then we also have the rollout of infrastructure, particularly looking towards new technology like 5G. And another important point in terms of exchange of best practice is digital governance. We need to develop digital governance projects so that governments can become closer to their citizens, looking towards transparency and equality of opportunity, equal opportunities. This is something that fosters the productive use of digital services. There's a demand for these services, and of course, it increases, enhances the competitiveness of economies through this digitalization. There's another aspect that runs through all of the relations that businesses have with governments is legal certainty. We also have the regulators, and we need to empower independent regulators. We need to build institutions, bolster institutions, everything that has to do with digitalization is important to be bolstered. And when we look at cross-cutting digital agendas, we have good examples in Europe that can be of interest to us in Latin America. There are other sectors of the economy that also need to join this transformation, and this is going to be crucial in order for us to recover and grow. In Latin America, where we're fairly devastated by the pandemic, and we have quite a number of challenges, particularly where we have unfortunate inequalities in our region. I would also like to indicate that we have taxation that we need to address. We need an exchange of information so that there aren't specific taxes on industry which have a heavy impact on telecom operators, which sometimes have taxes such as tobacco or alcohol would when they're essential services. Then we have combating piracy, audiovisual piracy. Everything that's generated based on this innovative production is something that's important to protect. This has been on the rise, very much so, in Latin America. And there are good examples of best practice in the EU towards Latin America, and this can be instrumentalized or implemented in the partnership agreement or association agreement. And then we need to, of course, protect the entire value chain. We consider that these are fundamental elements. I wouldn't want to forget to overlook something that's essential, which is universal connectivity. Even though it's a moving target that evolves over time, we also do know that Latin America has a lot to receive from European practice, and perhaps it can frame in on innovative and regulatory practices that can enable us to improve. Thank you very much, Mariliana. We will remember that important point, exchange of good practice. Good afternoon, Ingo. Ingo Plogger. Very good afternoon to you. Ingo is the chair of the Business Council, providing consultancy to leaders and business advisor, an advisor also for institutions. What investments are related to social and environmental sustainability that can close the social gap in Ingo? Thank you very much, Selena, and also Adrian. I'm sorry about speaking half in Spanish and half in Portuguese. This situation was talked about by the two speakers before me. This is different than the post-pandemic. We will be more digitized will be less globalized, will be poorer, and will be wealthier. This circumstance is very different than what we were looking at 20 years ago when we were negotiating the partnership between the EU and Mercosur and elsewhere in Latin America. We're going to have a strong recovery in certain sectors. Some are going to have stronger social inclusion, others not so much so. I'm looking at energy, for instance. These investments are much greater, and there is not much inclusion in these areas, production, distribution, and transfer. But there is a lot of inclusion when we reach people within electricity or much more sustainable development. The pandemic showed us that greater digitalization placed Latin American families, as we saw in Europe, in a new situation. We have young people at home, and they're learning in a different way. Schools, when children go back to school, the situation will be different. How they teach, how students learn, it won't be the same as it was. And universities will also change. Here, there are areas of innovation, educational innovation, innovation in content that are significant. Many things are almost the same on our two different continents. And then we have logistics, less mileage. There are many small companies that are providing coverage for this type of services. So we'll see a shift from jobs. And in business, when we recover, the SMEs will not all be back up and running. Our continent has more than 85% of jobs that are owing to SMEs. So the government's major challenge will be how to recover this with SMEs. And then we have the social agenda in Latin America after the pandemic, which will be much greater than it was in Europe. So, the issue of social inclusion for us is going to be something that's going to be politically significant. And this places us in a different situation. In global productive chains, the environment is a big post-pandemic issue. Our vision of the environmental dimension is a bit different than it is in Europe. We very often have long productive chains. And on other continents, these productive chains are short. And the United States and China also have long productive chains. So their rationale for investment is different than Europe. So we need very significant dialogue in order not to drift even farther apart, conceptually and in terms of opportunity. I'm very concerned about productive chains because we perceive, we notice that we're unable to cover all segments of demand because the chains are disruptive. and they were also very damaged. Even petrochemical sectors are in a state of imbalance. What we're also very concerned about the political situation. In Latin America and Europe, we have democracy as a common denominator. What we're seeing today in Colombia and also in other countries is of concern, because the differences between left and right are being blurred, and democracy is under a great amount of stress. So our interest is to find leadership and commitment with democracy in the long term. And then we have an increase in hunger, and abject poverty is something we need to find shared solution to, access to food and basic needs, so that we don't have social turmoil in our countries. This is a new agenda that is imposing itself on EU and Latin American cooperation. We need to listen to each other more and better. We need to have more dialogue, examine the differences that we are seeing, and we need to set this new agenda. It can be very good, but it also may be very risky if we don't take care of our fundamental values. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ingo. We have this social inclusion at the center, right up on top of the table. And now we'll move on to people in the room. Clara Arpa is a businesswoman, and she has long-standing experience. She is the CEO of the ARPA Group. She is involved in one of the five largest companies in her sector, and she has been a member of the executive committee of the COE in Spain. She was also one of the members that was behind Coaplam, and she also has an honor of being on the board of the UN Global Compact for Spain, and she is chair of the Spanish network of the Global Compact. Clara, what sectors might benefit from cooperation between the EU and Latin America? Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this forum. What sectors? Well, every sector that has to do with sustainable development, no doubt about that. The upcoming generations will be facing the challenge of having to endure with the very same resources that we have. These are the resources that 1 billion people around the planet had in the year 1000, and 2.5 billion had in 1950. And we've increased nearly eightfold. We're near 8 billion inhabitants on the planet, and we have the same resources that we had before. And right now, we're confronting one of many crises that humankind has faced. But we're hearing from scientists extinction is looming. And so we need to base our development on sustainability. And what does this mean? It means that we, right now, in order to develop in society, can no longer endanger resources that future generations will need in order to develop themselves. If we put all of the resources of the planet in a pantry, so to speak, and we set a date for when they would be consumed, well, last year it would be the 20th of July, and in Spain it would be the 28th of May, if we set it on a year's framework. And so all we did was gain 3 weeks, thanks to the pandemic. So all we can do is consume, produce, and manage things much more efficiently. We need to push this date back to the 30th of December. This is something that developed countries need to do together with those who are developing. And the famous Sustainable Development Agenda is a tool for us so that we can get on our way. 10 years have gone by, we have 9 left, we have to get going. And yesterday I read Antonio Guterres make a statement saying that we're still off course, we're still late. How can we cooperate and collaborate? Well, we need to consume and produce totally differently, and everything has to do with sustainability. In Europe, we have a clear framework, which is the European Green Deal. I've taken the liberty of bringing a report here. This is published, it was launched in Davos in 2006 under the leadership of Kofi Annan. There are 20 activities that are all related to what we're talking about. To depolluting our water, air, and land, to decarbonizing industry, everything that has to do with green energy and mobility, a different kind of mobility. And we need to think about things from farm to fork. We need to rethink agriculture. Of course, we have the circular economy. Instead of consuming and producing linearly, we need all of our resources. We need to really take a close look at this.
Ecosystems that we have to protect. And there are many business models working on it. I'm forgetting the last one, which may have to be cities. Yes. Cities are responsible for 30% of CO2 emissions. In Spain, we have 190 million buildings that have to be reconverted and become more energy efficient. All of these elements in our life, with culture, sports, and health, provide us for enormous business opportunities, new ways of production, new ways that can give rise to new opportunities. In Europe, it is very clear what we have to do is to organize ourselves, to coordinate ourselves and collaborate with Latin America, like we've been doing for decades, so that we can improve the development of our countries together for a fairer and more equal world for everyone. That's really where we can collaborate. Our objectives have to be clear. That's the only way we'll be able to overcome not only the pandemic, But all the challenges are waiting for us, which I have to say that these challenges are very interesting and it will be very exciting to address them together. It is very clear where we have to focus our investment. Thank you, Clara. Jesús Martínez Castellanos, CEO for MAPFRE Latin America. He joined MAPFRE in 1989. Since then, he has held different positions. He's been director of the business division in MAPFRE Life Insurance. He's been in marketing. He's been general director of business. He's been CEO of MAPFRE Business. He's worked also in the divisions of insurance in Portugal, Spain, and he's been the CEO of MAPFRE Mexico. Since 2016, he's also CEO for Latin American North, and since 2021, CEO for MAPFRE Latin America. Jesus, what can Latin America bring to a company like MAPFRE? Good afternoon and good morning to Latin America, where it's still morning in many places. I want to congratulate Madrid Platform for organizing this wonderful gathering. MAPFRE started expanding into Latin America in 1984. We are present in 17 countries. We are the most important insurance company in volume of primes. We were the first multinational. And we have an important amount of business and employees. So this is a very important region for the MAPFRE group. In Latin America, in the world of insurance, penetration is very low. It barely reaches 3% of GDP of the total global market of insurance, which per quota, perhaps we should have more than 5%. So, in terms of the gap of insurance protection, MAPFRE research measures what would be the potential market in each market and the actual market. And in most markets, this gap is over 50%. Insurance gives stability and security to families and companies, but it's been demonstrated that it helps economic development. The more developed economies have more important insurance markets. Without a doubt, Latin America and the Caribbean need a stronger insurance sector. And we want to participate in the development that the region needs. So, MAPFRE invested in Latin America, and it will continue to do so. After 37 years, we've seen all kinds of economic cycles, good ones and bad ones. We may not remember, but in the economic crisis of 2008 to 2011, this region helped many companies because the financial crisis behaved differently. Latin America needs private investment, and it has to be long-term, non-speculative investment. We may be seeing better or worse time with our currency, but investment needs to be sustainable, responsible. The companies that work in the region have to take this into consideration and act accordingly. I think Latin America has been the most affected region by the pandemic in the world, but we see nonetheless some very positive results. Some of them are short-term. For example, the quick economic growth that the United States and China are experiencing will have a very relevant effect in all the countries in Latin America. There is an increase of commodities demand. Petroleum or oil and copper are enjoying very high prices. Then there's another relevant issue from the European Union. Their commitment for a sustainable policy and of a policy of responsibility will be very important in certain aspects for Latin America. I'll give you an example: electric cars. We know that 85% of lithium reserves in the world are in Latin America. So this will bring very positive years for the region. Bilateral trade is facing a great opportunity, but we are also facing a great threat, which is China. China has a much lower amount of investment than Spain, and they have become the second commercial partner, and it's growing exponentially in the region. José Ignacio, you were saying about how important it is to update trade agreements, and it cannot take years. It has to be done in months or weeks. I would say that Spain needs to play an important role. Yesterday, I heard that Spain is the gateway to Latin America for the European Union, so Spain has to play a relevant role in these agreements. And we have to take advantage of these opportunities. Just to sum up, MAFRE believes and is committed with Latin America and looks forward to several years of success. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you to all of you. We've had very different profiles with very different points of view. We've talked about companies, trade agreements, time frames of negotiation of those agreements, the sectors in which it was important to invest, digitalization, connectivity, exchanging best practices, infrastructure, digital government. We talked about the concerns that Ingo expressed regarding production chains and social inclusion. So I would like to pose one last question. This is a more general question. Where, after listening to everything this afternoon, where should we focus collaboration opportunities between the European Union and Latin America? Let's keep the same order. José Ignacio, I think your question is very relevant. I think Daniel Bell, a North American sociologist, said that in this global world, nations are too big to solve the little problems and too little to solve the great challenges that we have at a global scale. In this globalized world, this match is played in the playing field of the European Union. We've reached a level of development that is very satisfactory. The European Union is the main investor in the region. Like Jesus was saying, we've been pushed down to the second place by China, but if we smarten up, if we do not smarten up, we will keep being pushed down. Clara was talking about the demographic changes being produced. The European Union is losing weight in their world GDP contribution. Now we are below we are below 20%. In the 50s, some of the most or the higher populated countries were European, at least 6 out of 10, and now we only have Germany in that rating. All of these demographic and economic changes have clear political consequences. We're seeing changes also in the United States and in Latin America. And together, we will not represent over 20% of the world population because there are new actors. There is a new scenario post-pandemic, and the European Union has to use all its assets. First of all, to make our companies survive, because I think the digital agenda is fantastic, and the Green Pact and sustainable development. But the rate of businesses that are dying needs to be addressed and changed. In that sense, Latin America does not need charity. It needs opportunities. And opportunities arrive through partnering agreements. So we need to sign and conclude, like Ingo said, the agreement with Mercosur, the agreements with Chile and Mexico, and this will help overcome the problems of social inclusion in Latin America. We have been able to withstand the crisis because we have a social buffer that, or through the recovery fund. But definitely the priority is partnership or association agreements. We cannot be short-sighted from a political point of view. We cannot just be thinking of the results in the next elections. We need to have an ambition, and we need to look for a wide global framework that can bring the European Union closer to Latin America, because we already have agreements with all of the countries, with a couple of exceptions like Venezuela and Bolivia and Cuba. We have an agreement of political and cooperation dialogue, but they are not benefiting from liberalization of exchanges for the time being. Thank you. Thank you, José Ignacio. Mariliana.
Gracias. ¿Dónde focalizar?
So, where to focus? I think we would have to focus on developing connectivity and in closing the digital gaps. These digital gaps can take different forms. They can be urban or rural, or they can be by income or by gender, or for medium and small enterprises, which are the base of Latin American businesses. Support should focus on that, because we know that generates well-being and it has a positive impact on the economy. Recent estimates establish that increasing 10% mobile penetration is associated to a GDP increase of 0.59 to 0.77%. It is also important to highlight job creation. There are some estimates that suggest that in large economies, like the one in the United States, when you increase 10% of market penetration of 3K or 4K generates hundreds of thousands of jobs. So connectivity needs to be focused on, more so in Latin America. In Latin America, company investments have made an important increase in subscriptions. Coverage in Latin America is nearing 96%, meaning 96% of the population is covered. But there is a 43% of citizens who do not use coverage, either because they don't find it useful or because they cannot pay for it. This includes SMEs.
Siendo apropiadamente incluidas en estas cadenas de abastecimiento.
They should be part of supply chains. They should be included. So I believe that closing the digital gap, which is also one of the SDGs, is an ethical imperative.
Recursos disponibles, sobre todo de los recursos de los fondos de servicio universal, y también eventualmente los subsidios muy focalizados.
Means that grants and funds focused on demand have to be used.
Que las personas tengan acceso
because that's the way to really make sure people can access the affordable offers that are out there in the market. So extending connectivity helps fight against poverty.
Mejores condiciones sociales tenga Latinoamérica, así tendrá también mejores condiciones para el desarrollo de negocios.
Latin America has better social conditions, business conditions will improve, and business exchange conditions will also be better. I would like to insist that the exchange of best practices is key. The exchange of regulation improvements and in public policy, so that we can all benefit from having more Latin Americans connected. Thank you, Mariliana. Ingo?
Sí, yo estoy muy de acuerdo con lo que fue colocado por José Ignacio.
I agree with what José Ignacio said.
De un lado, cerrarnos rápidamente los acuerdos que nos tenemos.
On one hand, we really need to close the agreements. Then we need to address digitalization and use it to accelerate innovation and opportunities for integration. Digitalization is the fastest and cheapest way for integration. Digitalization allows us to be closer to one another. We need to try and find quicker opportunities to have a more homogeneous agenda. In the next few years, Latin America will be more important in the social agenda than it has been in recent years because of the population increase. It's not that we should stop paying attention to the environment, but public and private resources will have a connotation for social aspects. And they will have another more important priority. Secondly, we need to bring European investments into the new context. According to the UNCTAD, 2/3 of international trade is done by international companies, so we need to invite them. We need to invite them to invest more and to consider SMEs. The interpreter apologizes, but the connection is not allowing for proper sound quality, and it is very difficult to interpret the message precisely. Radicalization is going to increase. Social networks lead to this trend. If we all lived like Americans, like Clara said, we would need 5 planets. If we lived like Europeans, we would need 3 planets. So at some point, we are going to have to lower the heat in the discussions. We're going to have to be more pragmatic and more tolerant with each other. I believe that dialogues like these, with different positions, will increase mutual understanding. So once again, I want to thank the organizers of Madrid Platform for inviting me to this dialogue. Thank you, Ingo. Clara, I want to help you save time, so I'm going to be very quick. I think we need to focus on many things, and I will not be able to say almost anything in 2 minutes. It is very important that we are clear about having a strong, agile, flexible, and quick administration, because we can work on all the agreements that we want, but then if governments or if public administration puts brakes on us, which is what's happening now, it's not a good thing. In Spain, the public administrations handle or manage at least 50% of resources, so they need to manage them in a quick, flexible, agile, and digital manner, and of course that they are accountable to us as citizens. It is also very important that we focus on education. We need to educate in new technologies. We need to educate boys and girls so that they can then use this technology, and so that we know how to optimize resources. The Internet of Things will help us. That's true, but we also need that students acquire the necessary skills, first of all, to improve their own possibility of being employed. Youth unemployment has to do with the fact that the education is not adapted to what is needed nowadays. I think, from my point of view, those are the two great axes where we need to focus: an agile administration and another way to educate our children and our youth. I completely agree. Thank you very much. Okay, so in order for you to win your challenge, I will be very brief. Latin America needs private investment. But this needs to be a structured and non-speculative investment. It needs to be responsible, inclusive. It needs business models of the type of business roundtable, where the creation of value is for all stakeholders and not just for shareholders. We need to invest in human capital. I completely agree. We need more training, more education, in digitalization. We need to close the digital gap of SMEs. That's crucial. This investment needs to create formal jobs. I think that one of the biggest problems of Latin America is the level of informal jobs. In some countries, it's over 60% of the economically active population. They work and they don't have any type of benefits or protection. So we need to create formal jobs. If we look at them, all of these characteristics are very much in line with the model of Spanish entrepreneurs and probably with the European entrepreneurs. So I think that's the type of investment that Latin American needs. But this investment needs clear playing rules. It needs a legal framework. It needs public and private collaboration to improve infrastructures, to improve logistics. Certainly we need a wide set of things, but I would focus on private investment. Thank you for the invitation. Well, thank you to all. It's been a pleasure to have a panel like you. I think we need long-term vision. We need to work for future generations, and we need to have a lot of long-term perspective. We look forward to having you tomorrow in the afternoon. And I think Elsa will remind us of that. That is correct. Let's give them all a big round of applause, please.
Thank you very much to all of you. Like Selena was saying, we now close this second day of Madrid Platform, and we look forward to having you tomorrow at 10 Spanish time for the last day of this international business hub between Europe and Latin America, which will be very passionate. See you tomorrow. Thank you very much.